top of the hour, I will go ahead and get started. I just wanted to say good morning to everyone and welcome to today's weekly webinar. Today, we are pleased to have two very esteemed guests from Project Equity, Stacy Smith and David Gray. I'll tell you a bit about them. Stacy has spent most of her career focused on helping businesses examine their impact and aligning it with their values. She joined Project Equity in 2019 and is now the Vice President of Program Operations and Client Experience, leading a team that innovates and implements employee ownership transitions. David is very passionate about helping business owners put employee ownership to work for them. At Project Equity, David helps groups have conversations that lead to creative client solutions, as well as develop strategic governance plans that support business growth. So today, this is going to be a great presentation where Stacy and David will touch a little bit more on Project Equity, but more broadly, what employee ownership transition options are available and how you guys can get involved. I just wanted to say a couple of things. Just please use the chat to ask questions. We will be monitoring it throughout the presentation and we'll answer them at the end if time allows. And then the recording of this presentation will also be shared afterwards as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Stacy and David to get started with the presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maddie, and welcome to all of you. We are just delighted to be here with folks from the BEI network, and I had the pleasure of being in person with many of you in August in Denver. And so I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation and talk about employee ownership, and particularly growing your own practice through using employee ownership as another tool to support business transitions. So I'm going to start off with just a few thoughts about Project Equity and why we are here having this conversation with you. We are a national 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are a leading provider of employee ownership transitions ourselves. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that works with us. We also work nationally with partners across the country, looking at how to bring employee ownership to scale. We think it's a really important tool, especially to address economic equity issues, keep businesses in their local communities, provide meaningful transition opportunities to selling owners, as well as new opportunities to future employee owners of the businesses. We convene, we do research, we have capital programs where we directly finance employee ownership transitions. And we are beginning to really look to folks like you to help bring employee ownership to your constituents as well. So to give you a sense of the reach, we are working in specific regions. We have relationships with local government in some of those cases where we are helping those local governments to understand the base of small and medium-sized businesses in their communities and help talk about how those can be retained in the community. These are some of the examples of some of our partners. And some of these are national partners as well. EOX is an interesting network of employee ownership centers by state. EO Equals, we encourage you to get onto that website. It's a great website to just bring general awareness about employee ownership to anyone who's interested, particularly a business audience. Last year, these are some of our stats. We talk a lot about employee ownership. We deliver lots of webinars. We do advertising just to raise the general awareness and help develop pipeline for everyone who is working on transitions. We ourselves have transitioned about 20 companies since 2017. And that's increasing each year. Obviously with COVID, that slowed down a little bit. And we are talking to hundreds of business owners every year about what employee ownership is, how it works, and how it might support their particular needs. So David and I are thrilled to be here. We are working daily with clients on business transition issues. So we're super excited. We're super excited to bring you the information and answer questions and just get into dialogue with you. We're going to talk a bit quickly about the state of business ownership, just to position, where employee ownership sits. We're going to talk about what we mean by employee ownership, and many of you are familiar with ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans. You may be familiar with other forms of employee ownership, but we're going to talk through some of those. We're going to talk about when is employee ownership a good fit, even the right fit for a transition. We're going to talk about how the deals get done, particularly how they are financed. And then we're going to talk a little bit about growing your own practice. How do you embed this, and how do you make this a tool to really continue to grow your own practice with regards to exit planning. And we've left some time, as Maddie mentioned, for Q&A at the end. Please go ahead and put your questions in the chat and we will take those. So Maddie did such a great job of introducing us both. I'm not going to go back and do that again, and I'm just going to pass the baton to David.
Thanks, Stacy. So what I'd like to do is just kind of set the context. We're all living in this context. We understand our present economic situation, that there's a lot we don't know is going to happen. And there's a lot of impacts that we've all been experiencing. So I just want to jump to some of those to kind of lay out what we're seeing kind of in the landscape. I'm sure you're aware of these things. So COVID, we're all aware of it. It's impacted us all in personal ways, but also in our local communities, our businesses. And so one of the things that we are seeing, well, I see when I'm talking to owners all the time, is a heightened level of burnout. The number of owners I've talked to where the business was going well, COVID hit, they had to scale things back, and then things ramped up again in the last several months. And then folks just start to get to the point where they're like, oh, I don't know if I can do this again. And so that's caused a lot of employers that we've interacted with, that I've spoken to say, you know what, I'm ready to leave sooner than I thought. I might have thought I was going to make it till 65, 70, but you know what, I'd rather kind of slow it down. You're all aware of the baby boomers that own so many of the businesses here in North America. We've estimated roughly 50% of job creating businesses are owned by baby boomers. And that is a dynamic that is impacting all of the small towns, large towns that we're a part of. The other thing that we're seeing quite a lot is serial entrepreneurs. I've got some clients that are those Gen Xers like myself that, it's like I start a business, I get it going, and then I want to do something new. And so we're funding those folks as well. So these are creating great potential opportunities for us when we look at the transition to employee ownership. One of the things we do a lot here at Project Equity is try to get deep analysis and deep understanding of what the present situation is. And so we do studies, we do data studies. You can find some of these on our website, where we're looking at the present reality of business ownership throughout the states. I would really say this would be a key resource. We'll be sharing resources at the end of this with you all. So don't worry, you'll have that information, but I did want to draw your attention to that as well. And the reason I flagged this is our work really is rooted in data. It's rooted in research and really trying to find those best practices. We can jump to the next slide. So, I don't know where you are at when you talk with your clients. We do a lot of that, talk with a lot of people. As Stacy said, we are kind of on the ground all the time. And what I wanted to share a bit, though, is just the reality from my own personal experience, what brought me to Project Equity. So I was working with Habitat for Humanity, and I was working in the San Francisco Bay Area. And part of my role there was partnering with small businesses, mid-sized businesses, to get donation of product for our stores. Over the course of just a few years, I worked with over 60 to 70 business owners that couldn't sell their business. I remember I had a window shop just outside of Oakland, beautiful window shop. They'd been there for like 30, 40 years. And the owner he couldn't find the right buyer. And he just needed to move back east with his family. And he was like, I just got to wrap up shop. Another interaction I had was a hardware store. It was a family-owned hardware store, multi-generation. And the next generation just wasn't interested in buying it. They didn't want to run the business. And so what I experienced there was that there were multiple businesses that there wasn't a solution for how to transfer ownership. And so they were just wrapping up shop. When I heard about project equity and the work they were doing, I was like, this is a solution for the problem I'm seeing on a daily level. And so that's what really brought me to project equity. So we're seeing that you've got a lot of business owners that are retiring. You've got business owners that their kids aren't interested. And I don't know if you've all seen this stat, but roughly only 1 out of 5 businesses that goes on the market in the States is ever sold. You go to the next slide, that'd be great. Now, when we look at employee ownership, what excites me about it is that it addresses multiple issues that our clients, the selling owners, have. I was reading a report the other day, and it was talking about what are the driving questions selling owners have? What are their desired outcomes? The top 3 of those driving factors, the first one I'm sure won't surprise you. It was value. They wanted to be able to sell their business for a fair price. Although the second one was the legacy piece. They wanted to preserve that business that they poured so much of their life into. They wanted to ensure that it was going to continue to live, that it was going to continue to be in the community. And the third value that they held was for their employees. They knew that the employees were the ones that helped build this project together. Many of the businesses I've started, I might have been the lead on it, but I knew I could only get there because of the folks I was working with. What employee ownership does, it allows business owners to sell their business, to maintain that legacy, to get a fair value, to benefit the employees, and then there's also potential tax benefits. Stacy, I'm going to hand it over to you here.
Sorry, I was on mute. So what do we mean by employee ownership? So many of you have probably helped your clients transition their business to a family member or to key employees to do a key employee buyout, or in some cases, a third-party transfer to an outside buyer, strategic buyer, maybe a peer organization, that kind of thing. When we use the term employee ownership, we are talking about something that is broad-based, and that means that all the employees in that organization have the opportunity to become employee owners. So it's not just the key employees who are going to get an equity, stake or some stock options, or just a few employees are going to buy out the business. It's a mechanism whereby all of the employees are going to have that chance to share in that ownership. And David has talked a little bit about this, but one of the reasons that we find it so exciting and a really good fit in a lot of situations is these are fair value transitions. These are not discounted. They are fair value, and they may not be the same level of value as a strategic sale where you're looking at 10x EBITDA and above, but most employee ownership transitions do happen between 4 and 7x EBITDA, depending on the particular business, the industry, the location, etc. The other thing is there's a ready buyer. You don't have to go find the buyer and make the match and go through the process of assessing fit and culture and things like that. The buyer's already there. The employees are there. They know the business, they know how it runs, they know the culture, they know the customers, the suppliers, etc. Owners can retain a lot of influence over the process, so they can really impact the pacing, the timeline, and the structure. So they have a bit more autonomy in the deal than when it is an outside buyer coming in. And as David really mentioned, one of the things that we find so important to so many buyers is that legacy piece. Whether they are a first gen owner who built this themselves, or they're a second or third gen who are stewarding it, but they don't have that next generation of family to bring it in, there's a deep caring about the company, the brand, the position in the community, etc. And these are all things that employee ownership really impacts. It also creates stronger businesses and communities. And so there's been a lot of research done. And so you can see here just a couple of the stats about what employee ownership can do for the company and the business performance itself. Really important, especially if you're talking about, as David said, you know, maybe a mid-career owner who's looking to get some liquidity. Maybe they aren't ready to completely divest of the business, but they want to partially divest and hold on to the business as it grows before they fully exit. This is a great way to really ensure that kind of ongoing growth and stability. So how do we do this? Many of you know about ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans, and I know there's some great sessions at the BEI conference addressing this as well. It is a wonderful form. It is very well suited to medium and larger size businesses. An employee stock ownership plan is where there is a trust that will begin to acquire or acquire all of the equity, and that equity is then allocated to employee participant accounts, and those accounts are then accessible to the employees as they retire. Management really stays the same in an ESOP. There will be a board of directors, and the trustee of the trust will influence who is going to be on the board of directors and interact with them as the trustee sort of acts as the owner in that situation. But we have two other forms of employee ownership in the United States available to us. And what this does means that employee ownership is then available to a wider array of businesses. Worker cooperatives and employee ownership trusts can be used in medium and larger companies, but importantly, they can be used in medium and small companies, even Main Street businesses, those businesses that are, you know, maybe $1 million, $2 million in value. These are really viable structures to get those businesses sold at a fair value. So in a worker-owned cooperative, the business is going to be owned by the employee owners. They will have a share in the profit as opposed to the retirement benefits. They will annually or quarterly share in profits. They will also have a voice on the board through a voting mechanism. Employee ownership trust, a little bit more of a hybrid between the two. It's highly customizable. So we see employee ownership trust as a great tool for a partial sale, something we call an on-ramp to 100% employee ownership. Let's say we just want to do a 30% sale right now or a 49% sale right now. This is a great mechanism to do that. The other forms can do it as well, but this one is particularly flexible. Again, the mechanism for employee benefit here is the profit sharing on an annual or quarterly basis. So we're excited that we have those different mechanisms, and employee ownership companies, we really see them all shapes and sizes, all industries. So these forms are really great and flexible, and we can take them into a lot of use cases. I'm not going to read through this chart, but it's a good reference for you as you are thinking through your particular clients and what might be a fit. David had mentioned some of the forms of employee ownership can lead to tax benefits and the deferral of capital gains for the owner. That's ESOPs and worker-owned cooperatives. So they can opt for a Section 1042 deferral on their capital gains, getting that additional bump in the tax deferral. There are also tax benefits to the businesses. ESOPs, one of the reasons they are very popular is if you become an S-Corp ESOP, there is tax avoidance for the business itself, leading to a lot more capital for investment and also to put into employee benefit. But the co-ops and the EOTs, they also, you can deduct all of the profit sharing piece there. So a slightly lower tax can result in that. We mentioned that partial sales are a real opportunity here, and all forms will support a partial sale. So this is a good little comparison chart for the future.
Thanks,
I'm going to
Stacy.
pass it back over to David. Yeah.
Great. So the reason I'm here on this webinar to talk with you all is because I get a chance to work with a lot of the clients. I want to share some examples, give you some snapshots of some of the types of businesses that have really benefited from employee ownership. You're going to hear us reference a lot of things about employee ownership. And I come back to one of the slides I referenced earlier where it's able to address multiple desired outcomes for the selling owner. I oftentimes think that when we're looking at addressing the needs of a selling owner, it's almost like when you have somebody doing house shopping. Like they might be saying, all right, I've got these top high priorities. It needs to have 3 bedrooms and 2 baths, or it needs to have a nice big yard, or be surrounded by the forest. Now, that might be their top priority, but sometimes you get down to it, they've got another one right there or another 2 or 3 that are also really important. I was talking with an exit planner a while back ago, and she was talking about a deal she was moving forward, and at the last minute the owner pulled out and said, no, this doesn't address this other issue that I had. And the parties were really focused on that sale price and not looking at some of the other issues that were important to the selling owner. So what I want you all to think about is the clients that you have, the folks that you talk to, the folks that you know that own businesses, and think about if employee ownership might be a good fit for them. So that's what I'd like to address now, is talking about those different ways that I think employee ownership can really address those deeper desired outcomes on the selling owner. The next slide that we're at really kind of focuses on legacy. And so when you've already heard us mention it a couple times, is legacy is really important. So what I had one owner I was talking with, and when we were kind of going through the process, I remember he just said this in passing, but he said, yeah, you know, I really want to be able to drive by the shop and see the name on the sign still. And it just hit me that this was like that deep longing that he had. It wasn't like worth X number of dollars to him, but it was something that was tangible. He had put his work into this community. He knew the businesses around the corner. People referenced him. He had good reviews on Yelp, right? It mattered to him. So what I have seen is with lots of business owners, they want to reward the employees. I talked about this earlier. They want to make sure, you can leave the slide up, that's great. You want to make sure that you're kind of benefiting those folks that help build this thing with you. But there's also this desire to benefit the community. One of the things I saw when I was working in the Bay Area and I saw these businesses close, these businesses took a lot of the tax support of the local community out. And, you know, there'd be a new startup that would come in, but they'd throw a lot of their money at buying equipment, covering all those kind of startup business costs, and it took a while before the money that business was creating really kind of seeped into the community. And so we oftentimes see these legacy businesses as key businesses for the support of that community. And business owners know it. They're probably on some club, right? They've donated to the local school. They might have their sign up at the football games. So Optimax Systems is a business that converted to this model of an EOT, employee-owned trust. It's in Rochester, New York. The owner had been there for many years, 20, 25 years, and he knew he was needing to step out. But what he wanted to do was make sure he could figure out an approach that would ensure the business would stay on for the next 100 years. So he thought of selling to the management team, but he knew that that would only be a solution for maybe 20, 25 years, because then they would be hit with this question again of what to do. And the trend in their industry is that big multinationals would come in and buy it. And he was afraid that when he was plotting out the direction the business was going, he realized that in 20, 25 years, the business would be worth too much for local folks to be able to buy it from the management team. So he found that employee ownership was a great opportunity for him to transfer the ownership of the business to the trust and have that trust be there to ensure that business would stay in the community, that those 500 jobs that were there in the community would stay there and benefit folks long term. One of the other things that we find employee ownership addresses is the difficulty to sell a business. It can be hard. I find that one of the things that is challenging in North America is we have this myth of ownership that, you know, if I start a business and it's going great, I'll be able to retire, I'll sell it, and I'll get the yacht. And I think a lot of folks, they see those ads, those Visa ads, those financial advisor ads on TV, and they think, yeah, I can do that. I'm not too worried about it. A lot of times I find that they haven't thought through how difficult it might be to sell their business. So they might have a niche product or they're unique in the marketplace. And so finding the right buyer will be challenging. They also might be too small or just that the wrong size to make it really attractive to folks. I had one owner who had a tech company and he was afraid that if he sold the business, it would be split up because they'd only really want part of the business. He had a unique thing where he pulled together two different dynamics of technology and he built this business for it. And he knew that only one of them was going to be really sexy. And so it made the business unique in that regard. The other thing I've seen is that management, especially in economic uncertain times like we're in right now, might not have the capital or the risk tolerance to buy the business from the selling owner. And so employee ownership allows those key managers to be able to still have a piece of ownership, still see profit sharing, but also be able to do it as a part of a team and not take all of that responsibility on themselves. So if we go to the next slide, I'd like to talk about one of our clients here. This was a client that really kind of hit these unique things. They were a specialty glass blowing manufacturer that does scientific glass stuff. I've never been there, but you know, it's that kind of like niche thing where I can't really imagine. I like seeing, you know, glass blowing and thinking about how that could be done. And that's a unique skill. There's only a few people that really need that type stuff, right? That business is in the Rolodex of just very few clients or customers. So when the owners here were thinking about selling, they clearly were in this, you know, silver tsunami baby boomers that owned the business. They were reflecting on what they could do. And they got to the point where they realized if they sold the business, they'd basically just be selling the client list. That's not what they wanted. And they were also afraid that that was going to undercut the value that they could get for the business. So by selling to their employees, they were able to keep the customer base that they had. They were able to get a higher value, keep those jobs, and it gave them an opportunity to sell when there might not have been a buyer on the market for them. The final thing I'd like to talk about is the flexibility of the sale that employee ownership can give. So if you go to the next slide, I talk about how employee ownership can create a lot more opportunities to address the unique needs of a selling owner. So maybe the owner just wants to get some liquidity right away. They need cash so they can start the next business. They want to do a partial sale. They're like, hey, I'm kind of tired. I want to still do this maybe 15, 20 hours a week. I really like this dynamic of the job, but I don't want to do the rest. So what employee ownership can do is add a option for a gradual exit over, like, say 3 to 5 years, and allow that owner to take the steps back on their timeline rather than somebody else's. So one of the clients that we've seen has done this was, if you go to the next slide, Point B Consulting. So Point B Consulting became an ESOP. The earlier one that I was referencing, the glass blowing shop, that was a worker co-op. Sorry, didn't highlight that, but I'd like to. So Point B Consulting wanted to move to being an ESOP. You're familiar with that approach. One of the things that they found is they were in the consulting area. And so what they needed to do was figuring out how they could set themselves apart in the marketplace. And employee ownership was one of those ways of doing it. So now, when they are looking to hire new staff, when they are finding that crunch of being able to recruit key employees, they have found that because they have employee ownership as a key component of the business, when they're hiring folks, they're not just hiring an employee, they're hiring future owners. And the employee that's being hired recognizes that as well. And so if they see a job offer where they're like, you know, I could do this one or that one, this creates a unique opportunity. And you know, it's almost like that bragging rights. I don't know if you've heard this. I had the chance to talk with owners now that are the employees that have become the owners. It's really fun when people ask them, hey, what do you do for a living? Well, you know, I own a business, right? And so employee ownership allows that piece as well. But I'd like to now pivot over and let Stacy kind of address some of the next things on how employee ownership occurs.
Yeah. Thanks, David. I've also been monitoring the chat, and so I'm going to try to weave in a little bit more of some of the things that are coming through in the chat. So all three of these mechanisms that we have, they provide a risk shield for the employee owners. So much like in a corporation, the owners are shielded from a lot of the liability. That is the same for all of these. There was a question about whether an EOT is a qualified plan. It is not. So a worker-owned cooperative and employee ownership trust, they are really flexible. They are inexpensive to create and move into, whereas an ESOP is highly complex and takes a lot to put in place, but you get some of those tax benefits down the road, which can help offset some of that complexity. But the worker-owned co-op and the employee ownership trust have a lot more flexibility. They don't have the same compliance issues and far less expensive to put in place. The other thing that we're going to talk about here is how do we do these deals? How do we get them financed in particular? David talked about, like, a lot of time your key managers don't have access to capital. They don't want to do a personal guarantee. They also might not be super cohesive and on the same page about things. So it's not a good fit. And you might think of that and say, well, then how are we going to get all of the employees on the same page if we can't even get the management team on the same page? So the way these structures work, they are the ownership structure. We are really impacting ownership here. We are leaving management and operations largely untouched. In some cases, we are replacing the exiting owner. We may replace from within. We may replace by bringing someone from the outside in. So the transition process, this is not, anything super unique. I'm sure many of you are looking at a very similar transition process when you are going through it. There's early conversations, exploration, understanding the options, understanding how this will meet needs. As David has said, your clients really have probably multiple needs. They may present with one or two strong needs, and then as you start to peel back the layers behind that, there may be some other needs that they're really trying to meet through this process. So that exploration process is really important. Then we get into due diligence. What is the value of this business? Does it have the management capacity in place, or do we need to replace it? What is the kind of timeline we are looking at? And then really getting into the nitty-gritty of the transition process. So structuring the business, looking at the governance structure, looking at the deal terms, getting the deal terms really hammered out, putting in place the financing, and we're going to talk a lot about financing in a minute, so that you can close the sale. And then there's work to do afterwards. It's not necessarily done by the folks affecting the transition, but as David said, you've now got a new group of employee owners, and there is some work to ensure that this is going to thrive as employee ownership. And so you saw those statistics, like employee-owned companies, there's fewer layoffs. They grow at a slightly faster rate. They retain their employees over time. So those things are a result of ownership culture, and ownership culture really being built and deepened over time, so that everyone has that feeling of, like, I own the business, I'm part of this, I'm not leaving, I'm going to be here, I'm going to help grow it, I'm going to help make sure it thrives. So a lot of questions about financing. This is a great question. And what we want to say is there are financing options here. Some of them are really common and well understood, and others are a little bit unique. So when we look at the sources of financing, most employee ownership transitions are leveraged transactions. So there's debt involved in the buyout. And that's great, because that means the owner has a cash take at the time of the sale. So that cash take is going to come from senior debt. Banks will lend senior debt. CDFIs, community development finance institutions, will lend. They are very familiar with employee ownership and these different structures. So usually we're looking at the senior debt being lent on a basis of an EBITDA multiple or debt capacity of the business based on a set of pretty rigorous projections. We see these loans coming in somewhere between 4 and 7 years is usually the max. 40 to 70% of the sale price is usually coming from senior debt here. Really importantly, there are not personal guarantees tied to the senior debt. So again, that's a really important thing. These future employee owners, their credit rating is not getting hit. They are not being asked to put money down, and they are not asked to be given a personal guarantee. So I see a question in the chat about a capital call. A capital call does not happen for the employees, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So how do we get to the rest of the sale price? There's going to be junior subordinate debt, largely seller financing. So there usually is going to be a seller note or an earnout. We've seen a lot of earnouts due to COVID, or warrants in the case of an ESOP in particular. That debt is usually going to unfold over 5 to 10 years. In an ESOP, sometimes you can't start the pay down of the seller note until the senior note is paid off. That's not the case when it's a worker-owned co-op or a trust. So that's, again, a little added flexibility and sort of speeds the process of the payback. And then there's other sources. So we do see non-voting preferred equity sometimes in the mix here, and particularly if that is, that can be an incentive for some key employees to get them a little bump in another way. In some cases, we've got mezz debt in place as well. And in the case of a worker co-op, sometimes there is a little bit of employee equity. It's what's called a buy-in. It's usually pretty nominal. So somewhere between, maybe $500 and $5,000. Usually not a meaningful part of the sale price. So sample transaction here, just to give you a sense, again, this is going to be super familiar to y'all because I'm sure that you are structuring, lots of deals and pretty sophisticated deals. So here's a sample company. We've got about 16.5 million in revenue, about 1.3 in EBITDA, coming in at a valuation around 4 million. We're looking for a transaction price right around there. But you can see we oftentimes think of it as a best and base case. So, we might be looking at putting an earnout in place because there's a good promise of some growth in the business. So we're looking at initial liquidity at 60% of value. So that's going to come from your senior debt, that first piece of liquidity. And then the rest of the liquidity over a period of time with the seller note. Seller note has interest attached to it. So there's going to be some interest payments on that seller note. And in the case of a best case calculation and an earnout, there's maybe earnout income over usually the same period of time as would be typical to a seller note. So maybe 5 to 7 years. Also tax savings. So if this is going to be an ESOP or a worker-owned co-op, again, and the business is a C Corp, then they can go ahead and elect to defer the capital gains on the sale. And so there's another bump there from that tax savings, if that is the case. So you're looking at total financial benefit, in a base case of about 4.7 million and in a best case of about 5.2. So I think what I want you all to take away from this is these transactions can be pretty innovative. They can be pretty flexible, and they mimic a lot of the other deals that you may be structuring. And that, again, is because there is capital to finance these deals. So as I've talked about, there is friendly capital available. When I say friendly capital, so increasingly some of the financing institutions are familiar with the different forms of employee ownership. And as I said, that lending is happening without personal guarantees. And there are other credit products. So a lot of our clients need a line of credit at the same time they're transitioning ownership. So we've got to match that line of credit with the transition loan. There might be need for other credit products. Organizations like Project Equity and us in particular, we have our own funds as well that we are putting into the mix. And that's really great because our funds can be paired with other funds. It downplays some of the risk there. The other thing, some of these, I will speak to what is beginning to happen is we are seeing some movement at the federal and state policy level. So there is something called the State Small Business Credit Initiative. So that's an initiative by the Treasury Department where states can access funds to underwrite and downplay some of the risk on loans. The move is to have the SBA remove personal guarantees in an employee ownership situation. So right now it is hard to get SBA funds applied, but we are working at the policy level to change those. And some states, state of California in particular, has already set up a big loan guarantee program that all employee ownership transitions can qualify for if the financing institution goes after those guarantees. So the message is like, we're working hard at it. There is capital available. There's a lot going on to bring more capital to the table that's really friendly to these transactions. I'm going to pass it back to David.
Thanks, Stacy. Now you're here because you're in the exit planning field. And if you're like me, I worry about my business. I worry about how things are going and how things can impact in a positive way. So what I want to talk about here just briefly as we wrap up and make sure we create space for time to do more questions and answers. I want you to think about your own practice. I want you to think about your clients or the clients that you want to get. And I want you to think about like, what are their desires? What are their needs? I mean, it's obvious they're going to want a fair price. That's kind of a given. We all, most of the literature, most of the work I find in our field is talking about how to increase the likelihood of a sale or how to increase the value of the business, right? That's an obvious one. But it's like, what are those deeper things? And so, when we talk with exit planners, we've oftentimes had them work with their client and walk the whole journey with us. So right now I've got a client I'm working with. It's in the last stages of selling to the employees, and the financial advisor, who's also an exit planner, has walked with them the whole way through that process. We also find that oftentimes owners want to bring in their CPAs or their wealth planners to talk with us. And so one of the things we're able to offer is to answer those technical questions, answer those like the fear question that the CPA has that's been walking with this client for say 30 years. And they're like, wait, what's this crazy thing you're trying? I've heard of ESOPs, but I'm not sure about a worker co-op. So we're able to get on a call, talk with folks and do that. The other thing that we can do is if we partner with you in ways is sometimes we come in, we do in-house presentations for your team. If we get enough folks, it might make sense for us to come in and talk about this. As Stacy alluded to earlier, our mission as an organization, we're a 501c3, and our focus is converting, showing that businesses can convert to employee ownership, educating on the options, and really creating a movement. And so education is a key place. And so what I'd ask you to think about is, would you like to deepen your understanding of employee ownership? You might have a really solid understanding of ESOP, but EOT might be a new thing, or worker co-ops, you might think that's just for San Francisco for small businesses. That's not the case. I've got an entertainment company I'm working with in LA right now that's going to become a worker co-op, right? So the variety and opportunities are really there for you. So if you go to the next slide, these would be the things I'd encourage you to do. Right. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm encouraging you. I'm just kind of like a soft nudge saying, look through your client base. Think about which of them would be a good fit for employee ownership. Learn more. If there is one that seems like a good fit, check out our website. We've got lots of case studies you can read through. You can share with your clients. There's other players in the field, right? We partner with a lot of developers in the employee ownership field. We have great resources. We'll be sharing those with you later. Possibly you might want to partner with one of the providers. You might have a client that you'd like to bring through this process where you've got a client that's got a solid business that hasn't been able to find a solution for that exit desired. This is also something that I really believe will help grow your client list. I think when you can put out new offerings and set yourself out there in the marketplaces offering something unique that might address questions like legacy, this could be really helpful for you. So the final thing I'm going to put out there is you might be sitting here saying, this is so exciting. I already know how to do this in other ways. How could I become a practitioner in this too? We'd love to talk to you as well. We are not wanting to be growing to 300 employees and be the national place where everybody goes to be converted to employee ownership. We want to create a movement. We want to train you and encourage you all to be able to do this work. I'm going to go ahead and wrap there. Stacy, I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to add before we just open up for questions.
I think we should open up for questions now, and I see some stuff in the chat, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute so that we can, maybe get a little more of a dialogue going on. I will go ahead and take one of the questions from the chat here, the most recent one. So these programs are meant for the broad base of employees. So an ESOP by law has to be available to everyone. Worker-owned cooperatives and employee-owned trusts, the same thing. So these are broad-based. And that broad-based nature of these is what's leading us to be able to access financing the way we are, and to be able to, in the case of an ESOP, qualify for those tax benefits. But in the place of a worker-owned co-op and an employee ownership trust, again, really be able to have a mechanism that all employees can access and downplay some of that risk. So if you're really looking for something for key employee management buyout, these are not the tools for that. These are the tools. These are an alternative tool for that. Let's see. And I think, Maddie, if you want to help us navigate some of the questions here, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been monitoring the chat as well. I know you hit on a couple of them, so we'll just try to do at least a few while we still have time. So another question is that employee ownership programs must include all employees, or can it be used for just one or two key employees that would like to buy their firm from you?
Yeah, that's the one I just answered there. So it's really, this is really the broad base and not for key management buyouts. Yeah.
Okay, I will dismiss that one. Another one is from Don. He asks how he can become an employee ownership practitioner.
Great question. Great question. Thanks, Don. David really addressed some of those key steps there. I think beginning your learning journey, and we're going to show some resources here in a minute, really beginning that learning journey yourself, getting in touch with, Project Equity, we can help. There's some, depending on where you are geographically, we might, be able to put you in touch with some others who are really doing this work. Typically, ESOP consultants specialize in ESOPs. They are, as many of you know, complex, highly technical. There's a lot of training involved in doing ESOPs. Worker-owned cooperatives and employee ownership trusts do not have that same level of technicality and compliance. Those are easier tools for folks to learn and then apply. And so there's training and how to do some of this. And in any transition that you are doing, there is an ecosystem of service providers that you are bringing together. If you're not an attorney, you're bringing an attorney to the table. You're bringing other financial advisors, that kind of thing. In these, it's the same thing. So in addition to building your own skills, it's also building that network of providers who you can bring to the table to do these as well. I think a good place to start, we are happy to really talk to folks who want to get started on this journey. And so you can be directly in touch with David or I, and we can start to point you in some of the directions here. At this moment in time, there is not a one-stop shop for advisors and professionals like yourself to learn everything in one foul swoop. But we are certainly exploring ways to do that. And, you know, we'll talk to BEI. That might be a venue to bring more of that content here as well.
Great. And I guess kind of to piggyback off of kind of what you were saying with the answer to that last question, Jason asked, he is in Minnesota in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area, and was wondering if there was a local representative there, or if you could just touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, there's some great employee ownership activity in the state of Minnesota and in Minneapolis, St. Paul. There are a couple of really top-notch attorneys working in this space. There's a community-based organization called Nexus Community Partners. They really focus on worker co-ops, but they may be expanding their portfolio. But happy to talk to you and make a reference and a connection to some of the folks there.
Yeah, and let me just also chime in there. One of the things that I don't know if we really kind of focused on is we were already a remote organization before COVID. And so we have clients all over the place. We have really kind of tailor-made our process to work in like a Zoom environment like this. So what we find is we can do much of this work remotely, and then, you know, we can come in, do some of that hand, you know, the one-on-one or kind of that in-person work as well. So there's a lot of options there, but it's a great question, Jason.
Great. And then to those, there were also several questions to just being asked to be connected with you guys. So we will be sure that everyone that asked to be connected with you has your contact information and vice versa. But there were a couple other questions unrelated to that. So I'll see if we can answer a few of those. Michael asks if he says, is the earnout income predicted on extraordinary growth assumptions? If not, ordinary growth is already part of the valuation, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. Yeah, the base case is going to be your typical predicted, you know, growth based on past performance and market conditions. And earnout is usually pegged to what we call a best case, you know, maybe extraordinary, maybe not quite extraordinary, but, you know, much better positioning. We model earnouts a lot too if there have been recent investments that are, you know, not fully producing their promise. We might model something at a base case because we don't know if those investments are going to fully pay off the way they are hoped. So that's going to wind up in the extraordinary or the best case assumption there.
Great. And then it looks like, I think I see one here that I know you haven't answered. One of them, I think you already have. But one of them, Tom asked a little bit earlier on in the presentation. He just mentioned that the cooperative idea and the trust idea are very attractive. And a lot of times the big obstacle is having the funds. So just curious about those strategies. I don't know if you want to touch on that any further.
Yeah, so that's what we were really trying to talk about in the financing there. So the funds are available, and that's the big deal. When Project Equity has been working, you know, for more than 8 years on this, and one of the things that we started working on immediately was that barrier to financing. And so there are financing partners available. There are CDFIs, community development finance institutions. You may be less familiar with them, but they exist. They exist nationally, and they exist in local communities on some state by state or region by region basis. So those funds, those financing funds, that senior debt money really does exist. We're happy to help you think that through for any transaction that you're working on and where to go for that. And as I said, we're really working at a state and federal basis on policy that would unlock more of those, you know, guaranteed funds like SBA funding and things like that.
Great. And then it looks like we've got one more. We probably have time for about one more. So the last one here I'll ask is another one from Don. He says, during the period of time the owner is carrying financing, how much influence does she have on both day-to-day and strategic operation of the business? And how does this happen?
David, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. Yeah, that's a key thing. And part of what I really appreciate about the work we do is it gets both parties aligned with the same goal. That's the long-term future success of the business. So what we find is one of the more common ways of doing that is the owner will be sitting on the board of directors and have a say there in those key governance decisions and questions. With the earnout too, that also benefits the desired outcomes for both. And so both parties are really interested in kind of keeping that institutional knowledge moving forward. I've got a client, in LA area. The owner had a real successful business. The employees were doing great. She was on the board of directors for about a year and a half. And she's like, you know what? You guys are good. So she appointed a proxy to sit in her place on the board. And so she's been able to gradually take herself further away from kind of that daily process. But the key thing of here with regard to like the daily operations, ideally that management structure is already in place. And if the selling owner is key in that management structure, we will then work at trying to figure out what type of management transition needs to occur so that org structure is able to maintain and move forward in the years to come. Anything you want to add there, Stacy?
No.
We're probably good. So I think if you don't mind sharing again, we wanted to get to that last slide. These are those resources we were referencing earlier. These are hyperlinks, so you'll be able to get into there. You'll be able to see these resources. There's a lot of players. We are one of the leaders, but we are doing it together with others. And so I'd encourage you to look at that. And then I know there have been a lot of you that were asking for our contact info. I've put it in the chat a couple times, but here it is for you as well.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you guys both for sharing your contact information. That was a lot of the questions being asked, and it looks like, from what I can tell, we seem to have covered everything else in the chat. If not, I will make sure to get any questions that come to BEI to you guys. And then, like I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we will get the link shared to this recording into any of the resources you guys want to share. We will get that sent out today, and we will get you two both connected to any of the participants on this call who are looking to get in contact with you. So thank you guys both. I don't know if you guys have any final words you want to say before we wrap up, but just wanted to say thank you for your time today.
Oh, it's our pleasure. This has been a blast. I hope it's been helpful for you folks. Please reach out. We will try to reach back to some of the folks who have mentioned they would like to be contacted in the chat. We will do that. When you get the slides, those are all hyperlinks, including the early slide with the data study. Really encourage you to get into that data study, take a look at your region, sort of where you are focusing on. Might be informative as well as you're just thinking through your own marketing strategy for your practice. So thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.